So, first things first, I am delighted to introduce Mark. This is the second time I've had the pleasure of introducing Mark. I did so at our Cardiff away day a couple of years ago. A more delightful man, it's difficult to meet. Mark was born and grew up in the Welsh town of Carmarthen before attending university in England and the University of Kent, where he studied Latin. I studied Latin, but I was terrible at it. There we go. I'm not too good at English, never mind Latin. He started his working life as a probation officer in Cardiff in 1979 and went on to become a youth justice worker and project leader for the children's charity Bernardo's. This was followed by a distinguished academic career. Mark taught at Swansea University and at Cardiff University, where he was appointed Professor of Social Policy. Between 2000 and 2010, prior to entering the Senate, Mark advised the Welsh Government on health and social policy, working closely with the then First Minister, Audrey Morgan. In 2011, Mark became the member of the Senate for Cardiff West, representing Welsh Labour and succeeding Mr Morgan. He then held a number of ministerial roles, including Minister for Health and Social Services and Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Local Government. And in December 2018, he was elected as leader of Welsh Labour, and shortly after, he was the First Minister of Wales. During his time in office, Mark was confronted with the challenges of COVID and its aftermath. And in 2022, he found time to be interviewed by the FDA's Public Service magazine, where he stated that the Welsh Government continues to buy into the UK Home Civil Service by choice, citing the importance of civil service impartiality, something close to our hearts, I think. Since stepping down as First Minister in March this year, Mark continues to serve in his Cardiff West constituency. Thank you very much, Mark, for joining us.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for that introduction. Hearing your biography read out is always a slightly unnerving experience, and this afternoon it's come after a very slight accident on the way here when I wandered into the wrong building about 20 yards away. There was a young black woman behind the desk, and she said to me, "Prynhawn da," which is Welsh for good afternoon, and then said to me, "Are you Rodri?" So, so I'm glad to have had the biography read out. So it reminds me of who I'm meant to be, at least. Well, look, thank you very much indeed for the chance to be with you. It seems a very good moment to be here because there is a general election pending. And I hope, of course, as former leader of the Labour Party in Wales, that we stand on the brink of a change of government. A change of government that should, and I think will be, an opportunity to reset, a badly needed reset of a number of really important relationships. The relationship between the UK government and the governments of the devolved nations, and a reset of the relationship between that UK government and the civil service on which that government will rely. I'm going to begin with two reasons for optimism, should that Labour government, if that is what it is to be, comes about. The first is that at the heart of that new government will be a Prime Minister and a Chief of Staff who are both in their own personal biographies steeped in the values of public service and indeed of the civil service itself. I think that Keir Starmer and Sue Gray will be demanding and driven. Demanding because the state of the United Kingdom they inherit will require it, and driven because for politicians in a first-past-the-post system, the clock begins ticking from the day they are elected. But I do think that that new administration, demanding and driven as it will be, will conduct itself within the overall ethos of the public service, the sort of things that I was talking about when we were in Cardiff and talking about that tradition of public service that is the civil service and those values of impartiality, of telling truth to power and all the things that you will be familiar with. My second point of optimism is that in the longer perspective of what is now 25 years of devolved government in Wales and Scotland, the last 5 years stand out as a period of aberration. They are not typical of the experience that we have gone through. The party of Macmillan, Heath, Major, and even Cameron and Theresa May has become, in that very short 5-year period, unrecognisable. When Supreme Court justices have become enemies of the people, when the Archbishop of Canterbury is advised to stick to praying, and the Governor of the Bank of England described as an agent of the deep state, it's hardly surprising that the civil service has found its relationship with ministers to be as difficult as we know they have become. The point of optimism is how quickly and how decisively all this has been found out by the UK population. And, it's my hope that when we look back in another 25 years' time, the period from 2019 to 2024 will stand out for the aberration that it certainly has been in the first quarter of a century of devolved government. Now, as you'd expect, I'm going to reflect a little on that 25 years of engagement at the centre of the Welsh Government. I'll be very happy to answer any questions on any aspect of it, but given the amount of time available, I am not going to say anything today about intergovernmental relationships and constitutional futures, although I'm like a Methodist minister on either of those topics. So if any of you want to offer me a chance to preach from those texts, I'm afraid you'll find I'll take it. I'll repeat what Tony has already said to you, though. This is the only constitutional point I'm going to make, that the Welsh Civil Service is part of the Home Civil Service by choice, not by obligation. Wales is a member of a voluntary association of 4 nations, and we choose to be a member of the Home Civil Service. Now, that's a choice we've revisited on a number of occasions over that 25 years, and other decisions are possible. And there have been points in the last 5 years where that different possibility has sometimes loomed rather large. For now, and with better prospects, we hope, around the corner, I continue to believe that the advantages of being part of the wider civil service outweigh the disadvantages. But the disadvantages are real, and at different times recently they've become greater, and it's just important for everybody to know, and particularly for ministers here in London to understand, that we are there by choice, not by obligation. What I'm going to concentrate on are some of the core characteristics which I think can be placed on the ledger when trying to sum up the relationship between the Welsh Government and its civil service over that quarter of a century. In what William Blake would have referred to as a fearful symmetry, I'm going to offer you 3 positives and 3 what we would once have called negatives, but which we now know are only working towards being positive. So 3 of each. My first positive, and I think the most fundamental, is that throughout the last 25 years in Wales, we have had governments which are dedicated to the notion of public service. Now, in some ways, the most basic ideological divide in politics is between those who believe that government is part of the problem and those who, as we do in Wales, believe that when government is good, it provides the best collective vehicle to craft common solutions to common problems and particularly solutions that reach the deepest into the lives of those people who need those solutions the most. But the opposite set of beliefs is very readily available. There are undoubtedly people who have been in government at Westminster over recent years who regard government as the problem, not the solution. What did Mrs. Thatcher say? Government does best when government does least. Government should clear out of the way in order to allow people the freedom to fashion better futures for themselves. Well, that has never been a belief that we have adopted in the Welsh Government. We continue to believe that good government is good for you and that it is at its best when it is motivated by that sense of public service. The nurse who comes in to work in the A&E department in the University of Hospital in Cardiff on a Friday night is quite certainly not coming through the door because he or she is motivated by the princely sum of money that they will get for doing so. People who work in our public services, including the civil service, are motivated because we believe that what we do will do good in the lives of others. Now, you can't bottle that, and you can't reduce it to a set of key performance indicators or targets or any of the other managerial speak of modern public services. But if you neglect it, or if you devalue it, then in my view, you will have sacrificed the key thing that lies at the heart of what makes our public services the huge force for good that we know they can be. Here are just two examples, practical examples of what that means in a Welsh context. The first is our commitment to working in a spirit and in a practical way in social partnership. I see people in the audience who have been very much part of this journey because in recent times we have put a bill in front of the Senedd, the Welsh Parliament, which has put the force of law, of statute, underneath our social partnership arrangements. This means that when we are dealing with some of the greatest challenges that we face, we do so by bringing around a single table all the key partners that you would expect to be there. Public services, private sector employers, the Welsh Government, local government, and our trade union colleagues. Those conversations are amongst the most challenging conversations that we have, and that's what they're designed to be. Social partnership is not some cosy arrangement in which we all get together to hold hands and sing Kumbaya. We are there in order to work together to find that piece of common ground, often approached from different perspectives and with different motivations, but to find that piece of common ground around which we can gather in order to make some progress in making good some of the challenges that we face. And the fact that we have social partnership on a statutory basis, a guaranteed place for our trade union colleagues at that table, I think is one of the positive distinguishing features of the way in which the last 25 years has been conducted. Here is my second and smaller example in its way. Many of you will have heard, I think, of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, probably the most radical piece of legislation passed in that 25 years. It requires Welsh ministers, in making any decision, to have regard not simply to the impact that that decision will have in the lives of people in Wales today, but you must also have actively in your mind an assessment of the impact that that decision will have on those future generations. We have a series of tests that we use to find out whether we are making progress in that great cultural shift. One of them is that we have an indicator that says we will have headed in that positive direction if there is a greater percentage of people in Wales who belong to a trade union. Now, I think that is pretty hard to imagine at the UK level, that extra trade union membership would be regarded as a sign of positive health of our economy and our society. It is how we think of things in Wales. It creates that different platform from which we can make those difficult decisions together. To give you a very practical example of the difference that it makes, I'm aware of the controversy that there has been in the UK civil service, or the English civil service, I should say, about remote working and returning to the office and so on. We have none of that in Wales because we have taken an entirely different approach to it. So we continue to have about 20% of our civil service in the office on any one day. It'll be a different 20%. People come and people go, and people come together for things that it is better to discharge face to face. But remote working, we believe, is one of the few positive things that we learnt to do during the COVID pandemic. It undoubtedly allows people to balance their working obligations with all the other things that they have to manage in their lives. It prevents people from having to make unnecessary and difficult journeys from outside Cardiff into the centre of the city, and we see no reason at all why we would wish to throw away those advantages, having learnt them in that way. That's consolidated, though, through the social partnership arrangements that give us that positive platform. Here's my second positive, that over the 25 years of devolution, we have had a huge amount of stability. The Labour Party has led governments throughout the 6 Senedd terms. We've never been able to form a government by ourselves. 30 seats out of 60 is our high water mark. We always have to work with somebody else, but we've always been there as well. And the approach of successive First Ministers has been that when ministers are appointed, the minister who is appointed at the start of a 5-year term is expected to be the minister who will be in that job at the end of that term as well. Of course, it doesn't always work out for many reasons, illness and so on, but the intention is that you expect somebody who comes into a portfolio to have a run at it that means that they will be there for the whole of that term. And the Welsh workforce, the civil service, mirrors that image as well. It is a very stable workforce. It has low turnover. And the great positives of that are that we are able to draw on both institutional memory. There are people around, a bit like me, who were there 25 years ago and remember the various ups and downs of it all, and that we are able to work towards, at least, a learning culture as a result. Because if the people who were engaged in an issue that comes round again in a different sort of way are still available to you, that you can go to them, that you can recapture the debates, the arguments, the possibilities that they were involved in, it does mean that you're able to learn for the future in a way that must be so much more difficult when the average shelf life of a secretary of state in the UK government is, 15 months? Just about long enough to sign the press release and be off. And the turnover of people inside government is pretty fast as well. So stability, I think, has been at the core of the advantages that we have had over that period. And that's linked to my third and final positive dimension, and that is expertise. Because through institutional memory and through a learning culture, you hope to be able to develop greater levels of expertise in the work that you do. I read a piece just last week by Meg Hillier, the retiring chair of the Public Accounts Committee in the House of Commons. It was an entertaining piece. She told the story of St Helena Airport, an airport built by the UK government where planes can't land. And she told the more disturbing story of 20 nuclear submarines decommissioned since 1980, not a single one of them yet dismantled and rendered safe for those future generations. Now, we are certainly not immune to disasters in the Welsh Government. You wouldn't expect that to be the case. On the train on the way up here, I was remembering the day when I worked in Roderick Morgan's political office, on the day that a note arrived to say that the ambulances, the Welsh Ambulance Service, had just bought, with money from the Welsh Government, with several celebratory press releases, no doubt at the time, that on arrival they were found to be capable of carrying petrol or patients, but not both. Writing the lines to take. I hope you can practice while you're here to think about what you might give a minister to say in those circumstances. So we're by no means immune. But I do think that we can claim, as a result of the approach we take, the stability we have, to have built up an expertise that means that on the whole, we are able to avoid some of the more egregious difficulties which Meg Hillier reported in her sort of end-of-term report. So we have an entirely successful 21st century schools programme in every single part of Wales. You will see new schools built, previous schools recommissioned, fit for the 21st century. And we do them particularly in those most disadvantaged communities, where the message you want to give a young person who's at a tough early time in life, when they come through the door of a school, the message you want to give that child is that you must be somebody special to be coming here, because look how special this building is, and look how much this building will be on your side as you make your way through education. We'll complete next year the Heads of the Valleys Road project, a project that has lasted over a decade, the most expensive project of its kind. Will create a continuous dual carriageway from where Wales joins the Midlands down to south-west Wales. Continuity of projects is what stability allows you to do. You can plan knowing that in a decade's time it is very likely that people of your own persuasion, and often people you know, will be there carrying the same thing forward. And we are just about in the final stages of the South Wales Metro, a £1 billion project that will, and I hate the word, so I use it very rarely, but in this case I think it's true, transform the way in which people are able to travel in that wider South Wales economy. We will also, in the months ahead, move forward with our plans for a national school of government. Because if you want to be a learning organisation and you want to be able to capture that experience and create the next generation of people competent and capable of doing the jobs, the big jobs that are there to be done in Welsh Public Services, you have to find a way of nurturing those people, of equipping them to do the job that is needed to be done. And a national school of government for Wales is a project that I am very keen to see taken forward, because it will give us the vehicle we need to do just that. Quickly on to my three working towards being positive. Well, here's one that's not been working very much at all in that direction, and that is the experience of austerity. We've had 14 years of budgets under enormous pressure. The budget that was set for the current financial year is by far the hardest that the Welsh Government has ever had to make. The numbers of people who work in the civil service in Wales will reduce this year at a time when the demands for the skills of people who work in that part of the public service are growing. What we don't have is an arbitrary target to do that. We have a series of techniques agreed as much as we can with our trade union colleagues for being able to get to the position we need to get to. We are very fearful in Wales of the Barnett effect of the 70,000 target job reduction in England, because as you know, our budgets are essentially driven by decisions that are made for English purposes. We have a much smaller civil service. We have not seen the growth that has been seen in the Brexit bonus world of the UK government, and we are fearful that our budgets will be reduced because of decisions that are being made in that arbitrary way here. My second challenge is that of creating challenge. I've tried to advocate for what I think are the positives in a culture of social partnership and working together. But if you're not careful, and if you're not consciously careful about it, then there can be a lack of grit in that oyster. And the fact that we have such a small turnover of people in Wales can compound that as well. Yesterday, we made a huge step forward in widening the gene pool of Senedd members themselves. In future, we'll go from the 60 members we have at the moment to 96 members in the new Senedd, and that is absolutely necessary. We need to mirror that and find ways of making sure that in our wider public services, when you have stability and continuity and the other advantages we have, you also have a degree of challenge built into the system, whether that's by making sure that you employ people through the apprenticeship route, whether you have secondments, whether, as we would say, you work on a One Wales public service where people are able to move as seamlessly as possible between our universities or health service or local authorities and the Welsh Government, or whether it's by intra-civil service exchange. In the very early days of devolution, it was very ordinary for someone in the Welsh civil service to spend 6 months here in London. That happens very rarely now, and progress in creating challenge, especially in diversity, has been painfully slow. And I guess that's, for me, because the biggest challenge of all lies in reforming the culture that we inherit. Now, in her article, Meg Hillier said that if you took a bleak view of the civil service, 14 years on from 2010, you would say that it was characterised by intransigence, inertia, and fear. Now, I don't sign up to all of that, but I think it is unavoidable to say that amongst the risks of culture that we face are that the civil service remains too often with a small c conservative, that it is often more attuned to risk rather than reward, and that it is strangely fearful of failure, given that the price of failure so rarely attaches itself to individuals. Behind all of that, and I will not preach this now for very long, because some of you have heard it before, for me, the greatest challenge in working with the civil service as a minister is the hierarchical nature of the civil service itself. The great difficulty that you can face as a minister in talking to the person who actually knows something about the subject, rather than people 3 rungs up in that hierarchy, who by the time they've been briefed by somebody who's been briefed by somebody who's been briefed by somebody, actually know more about the subject than you do yourself. But to insist that you speak to the person who's actually working on a subject and know something about it actually is very disruptive to the culture and creates all sorts of ripples and anxieties amongst the people who you ask to work in that way. So ministers must be disruptive. That's one way of trying to change culture. Ministers must be inquiring. One of the questions we know that is being asked in the post office scandal is, what questions did ministers ask? Yes, ministers were briefed that everything was fine, but did ministers ever challenge the advice that they were given? You know, it's a demanding thing to be inquiring, but I think it's absolutely essential. We need to change some rules. We particularly need to change some rules about recruitment. We value the wrong sorts of experiences, and we attach no value to some experiences that ought to mean that the door is open to a different sort of person with a different sort of experience, and that by itself will be disruptive and challenging to that hierarchy. And that means opening the doors wider than they have been in the past. And it means, finally, allowing diversity to be your sunshine. Because if we want the sunshine of the outside world to be shone on this culture so that the culture itself can be changed, then having different sorts of people in the room will be really important. Looking around this audience, I don't think that point would go amiss. And it is certainly true of the civil service in Wales, despite huge efforts to make it differently. So, in conclusion, I think I would say that if you get the foundations right, there is a great deal of optimism for the future. But on those foundations, there is still a huge amount of work that needs to be done if we are to shape a future service fit for the challenges that we know we will face and capable of doing that essentially socialist thing, here's my final point, which is to draw on the talents of all of the people who we are lucky enough to have at our disposal. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Mark. And Mark has very kindly agreed to take some questions from around the room. I can see Richard champing at the bit and the gentleman at the back with the red card up. David, I think it was. Yeah.
There is, of course, a dreadful habit, like when you meet your teachers after you've left school, you call them sir. If I call you the First Minister at some point today, please, it's nothing against Vaughan. Some of us have been with you for that 25-year journey, and we certainly haven't reached the promised land quite yet. But one thing that has been clear over recent years is that the only time that Wales is noticed in the UK is when we do things differently, or when we get something, what was the phrase you used, that's still working towards being positive. Now that you have stood away from being First Minister, how do you think that, one of the things about today is that you have put so much better the things I've been telling this lot for the past 25 years about Wales and the different way we have of working and the approach that is the One Wales approach. But how do we actually get the rest of the UK to take notice of where we're going? Diolch.
Thank you, Richard. David?
Thank you, Mr. Drakeford. That was an incredibly thoughtful speech, and I think it has given us a lot of hope for the future. I particularly took a lot of hope from what you said about your relationship with the civil service and your understanding and willingness to work. And at a UK level as well, Keir Starmer and his team's willingness to work and understand the civil service. However, in Scotland, Labour haven't been in power for nearly 17 years, and we have a different relationship with some of the other parties in the Scottish Parliament. The Scottish Labour leader has talked about holding the civil service's feet to the fire. He's also talked about, reducing the bloated government in Edinburgh. So what can we do as civil servants to remind some of your colleagues that, we are public servants, that we work in the public sector, and that we have got an important role to play if they've maybe not engaged with us for quite some time?
Thanks, David. Are you happy to see it?
Of course, yeah. Thank you. Well, Richard, thank you very much for that question. I think it's quite difficult, and I'm not sure myself that I worry about it too much. We face at the London level in the recent past a hostile UK government and a very hostile UK press, because we aim to be a progressive government, doing things that they simply wouldn't agree with, and therefore we are always likely to be reported in that sort of frame. More important, I think, is to go on doing the things that you believe in, and to use the political capital you have, if you win elections, to do the things that are consistent with the mandate that you have. You know, I've always said I'm incredibly lucky. I've been a Labour First Minister in a Labour nation. Wales has voted Labour for over 100 years. And, you know, a quarter of the members of our Senedd would describe themselves as belonging to a party of the centre-right, and 3/4 describe themselves as belonging to a party that is on the sort of progressive end of politics. So my ambition when I was the First Minister was to use the opportunity to develop policies that lie firmly within that tradition, to have the confidence of doing it because you're reflecting the mandate that you have and the political culture you operate within. If you need to make the case elsewhere, make it, but certainly don't be prepared to be knocked off course by people who belong to a different political persuasion and are never likely to be keen to give, you know, a fair shake in terms of the way that those things are reported. I think David's question is very interesting indeed. I didn't touch on it in what I said, but we're now in a position where across the United Kingdom there has been continuity of power by a single but different political party in all places. So there have been Tory governments here for 14 years. The SNP has been in power in Scotland over the longer haul, and certainly that is true in Wales. What does that do to the relationship between a civil service and the political party that is in power, and how can it answer the points that David has made? You can be quite sure that there will be colleagues of mine hoping to be in government in Westminster who will be fearful of working with a civil service that has had to work on, you know, a hostile regime towards asylum seekers, plans now to deport people to Rwanda. If you inherit a group of civil servants who've had to spend the last 5 years and more thinking in that sort of way about public policy, I think you are likely to be anxious about how easy it will be to reacculturate those people to a very different way of thinking. And I'm quite sure that in Scotland and in Wales, people who are not in government today but would like to be in government tomorrow have the same anxieties. You know, our civil servants have worked with the Labour government for 25 years. How would it be if they were suddenly to be confronted by people from a different persuasion? Well, I have two answers, really. One is that I myself have no doubt at all, but that the essential values of the civil service would withstand that sort of challenge and withstand it successfully. You know, the impartiality, the ability to provide advice, I don't think that would be compromised by that experience. But I do think, and I've come more to think over the years, that there is a stronger case than I would once have thought for an incoming government to be able to appoint a number of people beyond the handful of special advisors. I mean, Whitehall may be infested by special advisors, I'm not sure, but in the Welsh government we have essentially, you know, thousands of civil servants and just over single figures worth of special advisors that maybe, in the circumstances David described, an incoming government would need to bring with them an enhanced cadre of people who they would feel confident shared their approach to the problems that were being solved and could work with civil service colleagues in a different way. I think that would have been very controversial to have said that not that long ago, but I've come to believe that maybe the case for that is stronger than it once was.
Thank you. Any more questions? Yeah, gentleman there, the white shirt on one. And yes, one at the front here as well.
Diolch. Thank you very much. I'm Nick, I'm from DLUC, but I've previously been in Welsh Government, so I'm a rare example of churn. Really good to hear from you today. One thing I'm very interested about is English devolution, and apologies for my first contribution to conference is getting Mark Drakeford to talk about this. But how's that going to change these things, and what can we learn from the Welsh experience to support English devolution? Or does it not transfer? It's different. It's not civil service. What can we do to support that as civil service?
Thank you. Just one at the front here.
Sorry, yeah, I forgot. So you mentioned at some points that it's really important that we get more diversity, well, you get more diversity into the Senedd and general Welsh Government. There's something that I'm hearing a lot across government is diversity, 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 but a lot of time people forget about inclusion. So I'm wondering if you agree that it's not only important that we do focus on diversity, but beyond diversity is make sure that once we do get the diverse talent into those positions, that we keep it there and that we make sure people feel like they belong.
Thank you.
Mark, if we could squeeze in just one
Yeah,
more
yeah.
of them, Dave.
Yes, Mark, you reflected there on your time as First Minister and 25 years of devolved government. I wonder what you think are the proudest achievements in that period of time, both in terms of the 25 years of devolved government in Wales and in your term as First Minister, and also the flip side of that. What's the thing that when you've left government you're most frustrated that you didn't achieve?
Lovely. Thank you all very much indeed. Nick, I think that's a really important question. The Gordon Brown report, which is a report commissioned by Keir Starmer, which will be, the go-to document for an incoming Labour government on devolution, has more to say about English devolution than either Scotland or Wales. And that's because without completing the work of devolution in an English context, we're always, I think, hampered and hamstrung in our ability to work together across the United Kingdom. Look, I think what English devolution lacks, if I could be so presumptuous as to say this, from a Welsh experience, is it lacks coherence. So what you need to have is a coherent approach to geography and powers. I mean, we work with a whole series of metropolitan mayors who work alongside the border of Wales, in Bristol, in Manchester, in Liverpool. Every one of them has a different set of powers. There is just no coherence about it at all, and that makes working between devolved layers within England and between England and Scotland and Wales much, much more difficult. So I think the job of an incoming Labour government will be to move swiftly to devolve more powers to that level within England, but to do so in a way that gives, as I say, a sense of coherence around what geographies will we be talking about and what will be the set of powers that will end up being exercised at that level. I think if that can be done, then the United Kingdom will be strengthened, but it'll also be a more effective place in which to exercise government. The point about diversity and inclusion is very well made, but I think they do go together, don't they? Because people who arrive in an organisation from an unconventional background as isolated individuals face a very difficult prospect indeed. But where you are able to extend the range of people in that position, then that fosters the ability to be able to create an inclusive culture, because now you have that sort of collective ability to work together in order to foster that sense of genuine belonging. So I think they absolutely do go together. I think the one necessarily precedes the other, but it doesn't stop with diversity. Diversity has to be the means by which you then create a culture in which people genuinely feel they are valued and belong. Well, I'm often asked this question about achievements and regrets and so on, and truthfully I don't spend much time thinking about that. I'm much more interested in what happens next and what has happened already. But if I hear my two for this afternoon, they might be different if you ask me tomorrow. The greatest achievement, I think, of devolution in Wales is to have moved from the incredibly hesitant and difficult start of devolution to a position 25 years later where it is absolutely an accepted, ordinary, normal part of the constitutional landscape. The original referendum in Wales was won by a whisker. The first year was exceptionally difficult and traumatic. 25 years later, you've got to be over 40 now before you haven't voted in a devolved election. And for younger people in particular, it would be unthinkable that decisions that are made in Wales today by people elected in Wales for those things will be taken away and exercised somewhere else. And I think maybe that's the biggest achievement of all in only quarter of a century. It's in constitutional terms, we are absolutely still the new kids on the block. In terms of regret, the things that I regret are the things where I had a chance to go further, to do something faster, and where in the end that didn't happen. If you're in the business of government, I can tell you, you know this very well, anybody will give you a list of reasons why it would be good to have a bit more time before we do something. And we'll give you a different but equally lengthy list of why, if we didn't do quite as much as that and just narrowed our ambitions a bit, it would be easier to achieve what we want to achieve. And often there are very good reasons for that, and I've agreed, I've signed up to those from time to time. But I think the bigger lesson that I have learned is that you have these opportunities for a pretty short period of time, that the business of politics, as I said, is about the accumulation of political capital. And in a democracy, you do that by winning elections to become the leader of your party. You win an election when you go out to the public, and that gives you an opportunity to do things. And with political capital, you can be one of two sorts of person. You can be a hoarder, you hang on to it and you eke it out and you do things here and there in bits and pieces, or you're a spender. And I'm a believer in spending political capital, and that means that being bolder and being more ambitious and doing more than you think that you can achieve is actually the preferable way to be. And if I have any regrets, it's that I didn't live up to that as much as I could have done or would like to have done.
Thank you, Mark.